Alone on a desert highway, the headlights wouldn't stop following her. Closer, flashing. A voice whispered in her head, "Don't pull over." She didn't. But something kept chasing. And years later, she saw that same twisted smile on the news. The bodies they found were never the only ones. Back in the 1980s, my Aunt Kay was in her early 20s. This was before she married my uncle, during a time when she frequently made long drives between her parents' home and his, traveling back and forth to visit. It was a transitional phase in their lives. He had just graduated, and she hadn't yet moved in with him. The trip spanned several states and cut through stretches of desert that seemed to go on forever. It was the kind of drive that took hours, with long, empty highways winding through barren land. Some sections of the road stretched for hundreds of miles, desolate and isolated, the kind of place where you could go hours without seeing another driver, let alone a gas station. One day, Aunt Kay set out on one of these drives. A few hours in, she noticed a dark vehicle trailing behind her, slowly closing the distance. At first, she didn't pay much attention. She was singing along with the radio, relaxed and lost in her own world. But the car behind her started getting uncomfortably close. She reached over and turned off the music, glancing into her rearview mirror. That's when she saw it. The vehicle flashing its high beams, and a hand reaching out from the driver's side window, pointing at her car, motioning for her to pull over. Alarmed, she quickly slowed and began to look for a good place to pull off the road to see what must be wrong with her car. The second she began to pull off the road, she said she felt and heard as clear as day, "Don't pull over." Then again, stronger, "Don't pull over." Call it God, intuition, or just a gut feeling. But a jolt of adrenaline and fear shot through NK's body as she hit the gas and peeled back out onto the highway. Heart pumping, she silently asked herself what the hell that was as she saw the vehicle peel out behind her. The dark vehicle continued to closely follow, and motioning to her to pull over, fear and confusion set in as she began to question what was going on. Why was the driver motioning for her to pull over? Was there something wrong with her car? And what the hell was that warning she felt? It would have been a severe situation if her car broke down out there, especially before cell phones. But she pressed on, just as her resolve wavered, and she started questioning if she truly did feel what she felt. She started slowing back down when the dark vehicle picked up speed. It entered into the oncoming traffic lane and came level with my aunt's car. The driver smiled, pointed, motioned, and mouthed the words, "Pull over," to my aunt. She said the second she looked into his eyes, she felt pure evil. She felt a horribly sick feeling in the pit of her stomach, and again heard the words in her head, "Don't pull over." She described him as looking scary and greasy, and noticed he was missing a couple of teeth in his smile that she'll never forget. That sent chills through her. This quickly dispelled any thought she had of pulling over, and she put the pedal to the metal to try to lose him. He chased after her. She slowed down. He slowed down. She speed up. He speed up. Got to the point that he began to try and push her off the road. Aunt Kay was to the point of tears as this creep continued to terrorize her alone, out in the middle of nowhere. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she sees a couple of semis off in the distance. She felt if only she could get close, or even get in between those trucks, she would be safe. So she took off. He continued to flash his lights, honk his horn, and try to hit her car until she got close enough to the trucks. As she got in between them, she saw the dark vehicles slow way down and eventually disappear from view. She stayed with the trucks for a couple of hours until she felt safe enough to pull over at a gas station and cry. Fast forward several years. My aunt and uncle are married. He's working at a law firm as a high-profile criminal prosecutor in Las Vegas. She's now a full-time mom of several young children. Since I've known my aunt, she's been obsessed with true crime. Dateline, 2020, and Unsolved Mysteries were always playing at their house. This day was no different. She was folding laundry in the kitchen while listening to the TV in the other room. The interviewer was talking about a man who was being interviewed on death row as she paired another match of socks. She heard the man describe one of his tactics for procuring victims. According to him, he would wait along the side of the highway. A car would go by with a family, and he'd wait. Another car with a male driver would go by, and he'd wait. But every so often, a car would go by with a pretty woman driving alone. So he'd pull out behind them and follow them. He said he'd flash his brights, honk in motion for them to pull over. My aunt, now paralyzed, continued to listen. They would eventually pull over. They always did. Then I'd reach in and pull a few wires loose. When the car wouldn't start, I'd act real casual. Told them it was no big deal. My buddy runs a shop just a town over. I'd offer them a ride. Said it'd be quick, cheap. As he spoke, my aunt slowly walked into the living room, laundry still in her hands, eyes fixed on the TV. They always got in. He paused. Then I'd do what I do. Assault them, kill them, bury them somewhere out there in the desert. The interviewer asked, "How many?" The man smirked. "They'll never find all the bodies. I lost count." "And how many got away?" He shrugged. "Maybe 2, 3. My aunt froze in place, breath shallow, eyes wide. On the screen, he smiled. That same crooked, toothless grin she'd seen once before. On that highway, all those years ago. It was Henry Lee Lucas. But first, did you know that 98% of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed? That means you. And yes, I am speaking specifically to you. Probably aren't. So now would be a great time to leave a like on the video and subscribe. Anyhow, it was a scorching summer afternoon. I had gone out for a hike and ended up completely lost. Though that's a whole different story on its own. Let's just say I'd wandered for miles through untouched wilderness, no trails in sight. By the time I finally stumbled onto a road, I had no idea how far I'd come or which direction led back to my car. I was dead on my feet, drained, overheated, and still several grueling miles away from where I'd parked. Eventually, after hours of stumbling through the mountains and forest, I began the long journey home. The sun was still high, beating down hard as I trudged along the quiet country road. Home was still about 15 miles away, and I live way out in the sticks, nothing but open land and silence between me and my front door. That's when I saw him, a heavy-set man, clearly out of shape, standing by the roadside with his thumb out. He was hitchhiking in the same direction I was headed, and just by looking at him, I could tell he had one hell of a walk ahead of him. The same kind of punishing trek I had just finished, barely 20 minutes earlier. Of course, I felt sorry for the fellow having a similar ordeal as I just had, and so I stopped in motion for him to get in. I did not realize my ordeals for the day were not over yet. As he opened the door, he gave me a look, and we exchanged a greeting as he squeezed into the front seat. He was going to a spot off of the highway, on the way to my house, and off we went, engaging in light conversation. I glanced down at his side, and I noticed he had a prosthetic arm made of a hard, heavy ballistic plastic. With a metal hook for grasping instead of a hand from the conversation, he was an out-of-work construction heavy equipment operator whose house was undergoing a bank foreclosure. He was basically squatting illegally on his own property, probably hitching around during the day to avoid the sheriff evicting him and coming back in the evening to let himself into the basement. So, basically, a homeless vagrant and a transient that still had a physical address. This didn't raise any red flags with me at the time, though maybe it should have. I have a repertoire of interesting stories I like to tell. I dusted one off and sold him a yard or two to pass the miles and be friendly, as it makes the ride easier. He listened politely, and I found he liked to talk a little bit himself. My tales must have encouraged him because he began to tell me a very strange tale of his own. He began to relate to me that years ago, during what he claimed as one of the worst blizzards of the century. In his words, a woman had a bad accident on the U.S. route that went past his house. He said that she was badly injured from the accident and bleeding to death. His story continued, and he mentioned that the weather was so bad that the road was undrivable, but as a construction operator, he had a backhoe. He said that he loaded the injured woman into the bucket of the backhoe and drove her 30 miles through the freezing cold and blizzard to a major medical center and delivered her to the that was a pretty odd tale, I thought. I am pretty saint smart, having seen a lot of the world and some of the more dangerous places in it. I believe that he had changed up the story somewhat to protect the guilty. He wanted to share his story, but disguised his role, or what had really happened. In other words, I believe his story contained a kernel of truth, but he had changed a few details. I am pretty quick to spot inconsistencies and also can analyze just as quickly. It comes with the street smarts, I guess, another word for the survival instinct. What I think is true is that a woman who was fatally injured, perhaps someone who had come to his door for help. I thought that she died, and I think he used the bucket loader to bury the body. The wine, wherefore, I could not guess at, but I had immediately gotten that impression. I didn't have much time to think about it, as the drive was coming to an end. It may seem weird to you that I came to that conclusion, but perhaps what follows will convince you. As he ended his story, we had come to the turn for his house. As I turned into the long driveway, he had just ended his story, and I began to make improper propositions to me as to what he would like to have happen. I was a bit taken aback, but just simply told him politely that it was not my thing and ended my conversation as we pulled up to his house, and he continued to insist. The problem was that he was not taking no for an answer. I realized that things were rapidly getting out of hands, but I am a cool customer when dealing with actual stress and danger. I like to think that I'm pretty hardcore, which discourages most potential malefactors, but not this guy, which shows just how dangerous he was. He wasn't getting out of the car now that we were stopped, and he had his hard plastic arm, solid and heavy as a log, raised halfway between us, looking me straight in the eye and not saying anything. Having studied self-defense, I knew the deal. if I looked away or blinked, he would knock me out with the arm. He was formidable as well. He may have been fat, but he was a construction worker with large arms and muscles, from a life of heavy work. The weight was all to his advantage in any struggle. I knew the deal, though, and I always had a plan in case a hitchhiker proved to be dangerous. I had my seatbelt on, and he didn't. The plan was to floor the car into his house at about 60 and put him through the windshield. Even if I was injured or unconscious myself, hopefully he would be worse. The idea was that the noise of a high-speed crash would bring neighbors to find out what happened. That would also blur the horn. But I could see that if he went through the trouble of knocking me out for the purpose of assaulting me, that likely I would never wake up again. Someone this dangerous was not going to leave a witness that could put him in jail for the rest of his life. Likely he was a career criminal, and this was not his first rodeo. The other secret learned from martial arts is to never look away and hold the gaze, breathe the intent, then spontaneously block or deflect the initial attack. This guy could see from my eyes that he would have a real fight on his hands, that I was fully ready for a life or death combat. The situation ended when he opened the door and anticlimactically got out. I quickly backed out of the yard, spun the car around, giving him a departing glance, and headed out. Whew, I thought. That is the most dangerous motherfucker that I have ever encountered. I really should call the state police and tell them to keep an eye out on this scary bitch, because it'll only be a matter of time before he tries to kill somebody. And at least it'll have a warning about him on their files. But I thought the police often don't seem to take me seriously. And he didn't do anything other than pose a threat. No actual assault. So what can I do? The real reason was, now that the situation was over, I just wanted to forget about it. It had been a very long day after all. A police report would take up another hour of my dinner time, and I would have to deal with possibly skeptical or unhelpful authorities. In 2020 retrospect, I see now that was a mistake. About 10 years later, the property was the site of a very active crime scene. A woman from a nearby state had come to live at that house and had gone missing. I did not realize that his house was the site until I drove. One day, I drove past the property again, and the scene hit me like a punch. A state police crime scene bus was parked out front, flanked by at least 5 cruisers and a helicopter circling overhead. The entire area was sealed off with crime scene tape. That's when it sank in. I should have said something sooner. I remember thinking, God, if only I had reported what I saw. Maybe this could have been stopped, but I hadn't. That day, I'd been lazy, more wrapped up in my own life than doing the right thing. Later, news broke. They found the girl's body in a nearby pond and in a freezer that had once sat in that house. Dark, twisted stories began to circulate. Stories about a couple who'd taken in a young homeless girl, down on her luck, only to exploit her. And from the sound of it, there were others involved. It turned into a disturbing tale, one I won't go into out of respect for her family. A few days after that, I drove by again. The full-scale investigation was winding down. Only 1 or 2 patrol cars remained, keeping watch over the scene. That's when I finally made the call to the state police. I told them what Captain Hook had mentioned to me about the backhoe. The very next day, the place was crawling with investigators again. I'm convinced they were searching for more remains. The couple was never charged for her death, but last I heard, they were still behind bars, locked away for other crimes. And if there's one thing I walked away with, it's this: if you see something, say something. A 25-year-old woman had an experience about 4 days ago that I just can't shake. She was dog-sitting for her boyfriend while he was off on a backpacking trip. His house is tucked away in a semi-remote spot, down at the bottom of a hill, on a few acres of land. It's right beside the highway, and across from it sits a small rural neighborhood. It's the kind of place that feels both sketchy and strangely safe. What I mean is, the community's tight-knit, yet people mostly keep to themselves. You'll find crumbling, abandoned houses right next to neat, well-maintained homes. Classic countryside vibes. So when I agreed to look after his property and his dog, I didn't feel unsafe. The dog, Hennessy, is a 115-pound jet black American bulldog and English lab mix. A solid wall of muscle. Since my boyfriend and I started dating, Hennessy's grown incredibly protective of both me and my own dog, Lottie, a 57-pound poodle mix with more attitude than size. I'm a dog groomer, so she's usually done up in pretty silly haircuts with bows and everything. All of this is to say that one of my dogs is very intimidating and the other is not. Because of his strength, however, I cannot walk Hennessy and Lottie at the same time on my own. And so I usually walk Lottie alone and then go back and get Hennessy to walk him alone. We do about 30 minutes of walking each, and I like to take Hennessy after Lottie at night because I feel safer with him as it gets later. This is important because that was the case about 4 nights ago. I was about 3/4 of the way through my walk with Lottie when I got this really weird feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I looked around to see that about 30 feet or so back, there was a tall man in a hoodie standing next to an older, run-down home. I instantly thought the hoodie was weird. I live in Northern California, and it's early August. It doesn't get colder than 87 degrees in the evening, especially when the sun was still setting, and it was at that time. I forced myself to brush it off, as I tend to be fairly paranoid, due to my years of reading "Let's Not Me" stories. As I kept walking, the sun kept setting, and the streets began to slowly get darker. I would glance back from time to time and notice that the man was keeping pace with me, not breaking that 30-odd foot distance. If I turned a corner, so did he. If I sped up, so did he. Finally, we reached the highway, and I crossed right before a car came speeding past, hoping that if the guy was following me, this would put some distance between him and myself, which it did, but that didn't stop him from continuing to follow me. I walked as fast as I could to the house, not wanting to turn around, but now being able to hear his footsteps in the gravel. At this point, Lottie had noticed him too, and started to bark and growl. I forced her to keep moving and thankfully made it back inside the house, slamming and locking the door, hoping that was the end of it. Moments after I'd shut and locked the door, I felt someone trying to open it. The dogs heard this too, and started barking because they always do when someone is at the door. There's no peephole on the door, but I can talk to whoever is on the other side. It's a pretty thin door. So I yelled out and asked who was there. Through the barking, I could hear a man's voice. "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" For some reason, the way he said it was so creepy. It was like there was nothing behind it, kind of like he rehearsed the line, or decided to say it beforehand. I yelled back, "No!" and asked him to please go away. He paused for another second, and then again said, "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" He starts trying the door handle again, this time pushing up against the door. By this point, Hennessy can tell something is wrong, and so can Lady. The hair on the back of Hennessy's neck is standing up, and he's gnashing his teeth while growling. At that moment, I don't know what possessed me, but I threw Lottie into the bathroom behind me and grabbed Hennessy by the collar, keeping him close to the door with me. He's still barking and going crazy. I hear the man repeat that he wants to meet my dog, and I yelled out, "Leave!" He paused and then slammed into my door. I saw the door move, and at that moment, I unlocked the door and opened it just wide enough that Hennessy could get about halfway out. He's going bonkers at this point. My hand is starting to hurt from holding him back. I can hear his teeth clacking, and he ferociously chomps toward the man. Well, this dude was not expecting Hennessy. He stumbled back, almost falling over, and cursed as he scrambled to stay off the ground. He didn't even look at me, instead booked it up the hill as fast as he could and out of sight. I managed to pull Hennessy back in and called the cops to tell him what happened. I never got a good look at the guy, and they basically told me there wasn't anything I could really do. But they did take my statement, and they told me they'd contact me if anything ever came of it. I am so thankful for Hennessy. After everything, I curled up with him and Lottie that night and just cried, realizing how terrifying the whole ordeal had been. The very next day, I drove nearly an hour to the pet store to get him the biggest bone I could find. He definitely earned it. I picked something out for Lottie, too. I still don't understand why that creep never went after him, especially with 2 dogs barking inside. My guess is he didn't realize there were 2 dogs. Or maybe he thought both were like my little fluffy poodle, something he wouldn't fear. I'm grateful the guy wasn't armed. Looking back, I probably should have called the cops and stayed locked inside. But maybe it was because he saw Hennessy. Now I know one thing for sure. If he ever comes back and tries to mess with us again, my big, gentle guy won't hesitate to defend his family. He'd rip that creep's arm off without a second thought. This took place several years ago. While it might not be as terrifying as some of the stories you've heard, it remains one of the strangest and most unsettling experiences I've ever had. I'm 33 years old and live out in the rural Midwest. I was born and raised in my hometown, and aside from a few months spent living with my dad on the East Coast, I've stayed here my whole life. Over time, I've become pretty familiar with most of the back roads in the area. One of those roads is an old highway that's lost much of its traffic since the interstate was built through town. It's a long, winding stretch that offers beautiful scenic views during the day and a quiet retreat from the city lights after dark. Along this road, there's a small parking area with no more than 10 spots, 2 picnic tables, and a single trash bin. Because it's tucked away in dense woods and secluded from the rest of the drive, it's easy to overlook. Over the years, this hidden spot became a common hangout for local teens looking to get away. I spent many Friday nights there, smoking with friends and making memories. It's a place filled with nostalgia, and whenever I need some peace or solitude, it's still one of my favorite places to escape to. One night, about 5 years ago, my girlfriend and I are going through a rough patch. We had a big fight due to having to work early in the morning, and her deciding to have a party full of her loud and intoxicated friends. and things escalated, and I stormed out of the house and started driving towards my favorite spot. As soon as I was out of the city limits, I promptly cranked my angriest metal music and sped down the road, chain smoking my menthols in an effort to calm down until I finally found the turnoff for the spot. I was happy to find no other cars in the lot, meaning that I wouldn't awkwardly stumble upon two lovers engaged in, the act. And I immediately jumped out of the car and sat down on one of the picnic tables, lit a cigarette, and stared at the stars. I sat there for several minutes until I decided to head back to the warmth of my car after hearing some rustling coming from the woods. Not wanting to become a chew toy for a coyote or an angry bobcat, I hustled back to my car and blared my music again, quickly forgetting the sounds that I had just heard. I decided to have one more smoke and then make my way home. I smoked it halfway through when out of nowhere, I heard pounding coming from the passenger side of my car. I looked over to see a large hand beating against the window. I turned on my music that was still blasting, and as I did, I can hear a very angry voice shouting, "Open door," while yanking on the door handle. Thankfully, my doors were locked, and after a few moments, the man disappeared from the passenger side, and then reappeared out of the driver's side window, while screaming and cursing at me to open the door. He was now punching my window, trying to get in. I was frozen in a mix of confusion and fear, but eventually snapped out of it and threw the car in reverse. It was so dark that I didn't get a good look at the guy, except for a split second he was illuminated by my headlights. He had a black zip-up hoodie with the hood up, a dark gray t-shirt, and a ball cap. He was a stocky guy and had to be well over 6 feet as he towered over my Sonata. The only distinguishing feature that I could make out was a very large, dark beard, and I noped out of there real quick. I flirted across the parking lot and back towards the highway, and that's when I heard it. A loud bang that sounded like a gun. I slammed my foot down on the gas and took the first turn I could find. Once I was certain no one was following me, I eased up, only to realize I was doing 90 miles per hour on a gravel road. At the time, one of my closest friends worked at a nearby gas station, so I headed there to tell him everything. We carefully inspected my car and noticed a few dents on the roof, plus what looked like a boot print on the passenger door. After talking it through, we decided against calling the police. The spot was about a 20-minute drive from the nearest town, and we figured the guy would be long gone by the time anyone arrived. Looking back, I know that was probably foolish. I'm still shaken by the whole experience. I don't know if the guy meant to rob me, steal my car, or something worse, but I'm just thankful I made it home safe. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing video. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. All right, that's it for today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. The house was dead silent. The porch light was solar powered, and no one answered the door. Then a car pulled up behind mine, and a man stepped out. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stared. That's when I knew. I wasn't delivering food. I was walking into a trap. It was your average Friday night. My college classes had just wrapped up for the week, and like I usually did on weekends, I headed out to make some extra cash doing DoorDash deliveries. It was my go-to way of covering living expenses while staying on campus. The evening started off solid. I knocked out a bunch of orders and racked up a decent amount. But after the dinner rush died down, things hit a wall. orders slowed to a crawl, and the few that did pop up were barely worth it. Low pay, long waits, not worth the gas or time. After about an hour of just driving around without picking anything up, something finally came through that looked decent. It was about 8 miles out, which was a bit of a stretch, but the payout made it worthwhile. Not a jackpot or anything, but definitely better than most of the scraps I'd been seeing. I accepted it right away, ran into the restaurant to grab the food, jumped back into my car, and started the trip. The GPS said it would take 30 minutes to get there, probably the longest delivery route I'd taken up to that point. Most of my usual drops were within 15 or 20 minutes of campus. Go any further than that, and the neighborhoods give way to long stretches of farmland and wide, empty fields. Sure enough, once I passed that 20-minute mark, things turned rural real quick. Houses became rare, scattered far apart and surrounded by crops and open land. Nothing but flat fields and silent roads for miles. The final leg of the drive, about 10 more minutes, was nothing but a narrow road cutting through farmland. No traffic, no streetlights, just darkness and the quiet hum of my tires on pavement. Eventually, I reached the address. A dirt driveway veered off the road and led through an open field. Way out in the distance, barely visible, was a small house sitting alone. There was a dirt driveway connecting to the road, leading through a large field, and in the far back was a small house. Driving through the field felt very eerie. Even though I'm not one to get nervous without reason, this felt different. As I got further out from the road, the only sound was the low rumbling of my car on the dirt. I parked out front and got the bag ready, then left the car on as I stepped out. The night was quiet and the house was dark, having only the porch light on to illuminate the outside. I walked through the unkempt grass and up to the porch. Knocking on the door, as I waited, I looked back at my car, sitting in the dark with the field of pitch black behind it. A moment went by. Then I knocked again, but there was no response, not even the sound of anyone inside. It didn't take long for me to realize the strangeness of the situation. Seeing no lights on in the windows, and noticing how decayed the house looked up close. The only thing that made me think it couldn't be abandoned was that I had an order for this address, and the porch light was on. I looked at the light, thinking, why would that be the only light? But by some odd chance, I happened to recognize the top portion of the casing having a cheap solar battery. It was just an automatic light that charges during the day and turns on in the evening, meaning nobody had to be here to turn it on. Just as I was piecing this all together, though, I heard a rumbling sound behind me. I turned, seeing a car driving down the dirt path and coming up right behind my car. I stood there and stared at their headlights until a man stepped out. I yelled from the porch, asking if this was his order, but he didn't reply. He just stood right next to his car and didn't move or speak. I felt my adrenaline spike as I began realizing how horrible the situation likely was. The silence of the night only reminded me that there was nobody here to help. I was stuck in the middle of a field, between an empty house and a stranger in a split-second instinctual reaction. I dropped the bag and sprinted off the porch, running behind the house and straight into the field of grass. I looked back, seeing the man coming up behind me. Frantically, I continued running, and the further out I got, the thicker and taller the grass became, until it was covering all views of direction. By then, I knew the guy had no chance in following me. I slowed down, catching my breath as I carefully moved through the crops and tried to be quiet in case the man was still trying to find me. Eventually, I made it to someone else's yard, and from there, I got to a road where I had enough signal to call for help. Police picked me up and went to check on my car, but of course the man was gone by then. I was surprised though, because my car hadn't been looted, and the bag of food was still on the porch of the abandoned house. But that could only mean that the man had other intentions, likely far worse than just robbing me. But first, did you know that 98% of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed? That means you. And yes, I am speaking specifically to you. Probably aren't. So now would be a great time to leave a like on the video and subscribe. Anyhow, this happened when I was 18, during the drive from my hometown to the college I'd be attending. I had everything I owned stuffed into the back seat and trunk of my beat-up SUV. It wasn't just my first long road trip by myself. It was also the first real time I'd ever be away from my family. So yeah, I was a little on edge. The total distance was around 600 miles, and I'd planned to split it over 2 days. I was following whatever route the GPS told me to take. It estimated I'd reach the hotel by 11 p.m., though I knew that could stretch later with traffic, food stops, and fueling up. By the time 7 o'clock rolled around, the sun had fully disappeared, and so had most of the cars on the road. Every now and then, I'd see headlights in the distance, but they'd vanish as quickly as they came. For the most part, it felt like I was driving through total emptiness. The quiet, the monotony, and the darkness started wearing on me. I was getting sleepy, bored. So, around 10 p.m., I figured I'd stop at the next gas station to fill up and grab something to wake me up before finishing the last leg of the drive. About 10 minutes later, I saw an exit and pulled off. The gas station wasn't in a town or near anything. It stood completely alone, just a few pumps and a tiny, dimly lit convenience store surrounded by darkness. There were no other cars, no streetlights, not even a flicker of light from distant houses or buildings. I pulled up to a pump and stepped out to fill my tank. As I glanced around, the silence hit me all at once. And then suddenly, someone was there. It made me flinch. A man was walking toward me. I hadn't heard him approach at all. He looked older, maybe mid-50s, and to be honest, he looked rough, like he might have been living on the streets. Still, I tried to stay calm. Being approached out here wasn't something I was expecting, and his short smile didn't make me feel any more comfortable. "Hi, do you need something?" I said, hoping he wouldn't walk any closer. The man stopped a few feet from my car and looked around almost cautiously before responding. "Take the exit back onto the highway." I looked at him confused, not sure if I was understanding him right. He pointed behind me at the exit I came from and repeated himself. "Take the exit back onto the highway." After a second, I said okay. Then the man walked off, but I was still really confused. The exit I came from that he wanted me to take again was a one-way road. So by his logic, he wanted me to drive on the wrong side of the road and do a U-turn back onto the highway. It just didn't make any sense. I looked out at the entrance road, the obvious one that I was supposed to take, and there were no signs of any construction or anything blocking it. It just looked like an empty ramp back onto the highway. As I put the pump back and got in my car, I glanced over at the man who was now just sitting against the side of the convenience store. The more I thought about it, though, the more crazy that man seemed just to be sitting out here saying nonsense. I thought maybe this was some kind of trap or something. So I went with my instinct and drove out of the lot and toward the entrance to the highway. As I merged onto it, though, I realized pretty much all the streetlights were out. I slowed down, thinking maybe this was a construction zone or something. I kept my eyes focused on the road directly ahead, making sure to be cautious of anything. But while I made my way through the unlit road, I saw only a brief outline of a figure to my left, before a pickup truck came out of nowhere and stopped right in front of my car. Every door opened as 4 men jumped out of the truck and started running up to my car, holding weapons of all kinds. Metal bats, machetes, knives, and not even anything covering their faces. They just had this emotionless gaze, like they felt nothing of what they were doing. I quickly started backing up as they got just a few feet away from my windows. And once I got far enough back, I suddenly saw the outline of dozens of people coming out of the shadows off the side of the road. A few even tried chasing my car as I frantically reversed out of there. As soon as I could, I turned around and speed off. I called 911 once I felt I was safe. But for some reason, I never got a call back. No update on it at all, almost like they didn't even check on it. Ironically, though, it was the creepy old guy at the gas station that tried to prevent me from even getting caught up in that mess, or at least that was what I assumed he was doing. Either way, I was incredibly lucky to get out of that with my life, as I have no idea what that was or what they were all planning to do. I was hauling a full truckload out to a company on the far west coast, starting all the way from the east. This cross-country route, it's one I know like the back of my hand. I've been a trucker for close to 2 decades, and I've made this exact drive more times than I can count. Same highways, same rest stops, same stretches of nothing in between. It's all become routine at this point. Over the course of these 20 years, nothing truly wild has ever happened to me on the road. Sure, I've seen some strange things here and there, but nothing that ever led to anything serious, nothing that stuck with me. So when I found myself back on this familiar route once again, I wasn't thinking twice about it. It felt like just another job, another day behind the wheel, or at least that's what I thought. About 20 hours into the route, a storm started coming over and slowing down my driving. It was late too, so by then I was already looking for the next truck stop to sleep at. As I drove, though, a very sudden light appeared behind me. The road I was on was flat and straight, so I would have seen them coming in my mirror. But it was all of a sudden that they were right behind me. Maybe they had just turned on their lights or something. I didn't know, but they very quickly came right up to the back. I kept my eyes on them until they got so close that they were completely covered by the trailer. All I could see were their headlights reflecting off the back, but then their lights shut off. I maintained my speed and kept looking back at my mirrors, trying to see if they were still behind me. But I had no way to know. For someone to turn off their lights in the middle of a heavy storm was insane, though. And to be tailing behind me so close was just as insane. Thankfully, a sign showed a truck stop was only 5 miles ahead, so at least I knew I was close to getting away from whatever this was. I didn't want to jump to conclusions based on just some weird behavior, but as a trucker, it's hard not to think about the possibility of it being an attempted robbery, especially when alone on the road at night. For the rest of the 5 miles, I saw no signs of them behind me. I was still on edge because I couldn't really see anything anyway, but I started feeling less worried as I was coming in on the truck stop. I pulled in, trying to check my mirrors to see if they followed, but with the rain and lack of lighting, it was really too hard to tell. The truck stop was mostly empty though, aside from a few trucks at the gas pumps. I pulled off to the side and parked in the middle of the lot. After waiting a minute and getting some of my stuff organized, I opened the truck door and leaned my head out, looking along the side of the trailer. I was drenched from the rain in just a matter of seconds, but from what I could tell, there was no car behind me. I closed the door and finally felt a bit of relief, grabbing my pillow and blanket from the passenger side. I locked the doors, turned off the truck, and tried to get some shut-eye. The rain pounding on the metal roof made it easy to fall asleep, blocking out any possible sounds coming from other trucks pulling in and out. When I woke up, though, I felt I had only been asleep for a few minutes. I looked around, seeing it was still dark out, and the storm was the same, if not worse. But before I could check my mirrors, a loud thump shook the truck. My eyes opened wider. I reached for the door handle and opened it, looking out at the back of the trailer. Through the rain, I could barely see the outline of a car with its headlights off and 2 men moving around in front of it. Terrified, I hesitated to step out and confront them, and as I sat there in that moment of hesitation, the door suddenly slammed against my body, shoving me back further into the driver's seat. Another man stood outside, yelling at me to stay where I was, then slamming the door again. His right hand was shoved in his hoodie, and with 2 other men behind the truck, I was in no position to try anything. I could feel the truck shake as I just sat in place with the guy outside my door watching my every move. He didn't even look away for a second. This went on for a few minutes, then they ran back to their car and drove off. I was still in shock, watching their car disappear under the road. I called the police and put in a report, but no information ever came up on who the men were. All I know is that if I had been any less aware and had just tried to drive off at first sight of the men, I probably wouldn't have been able to make it out as safely as I did. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing video. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. All right, that's it for today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. He crashed our party, then tried to kill me. What started as a wild college weekend at Deltopia turned into a real-life nightmare. I woke up to shattered glass and a stalker with a knife hiding in the closet. I attend a public university in California that's part of the UC system. Some UC campuses, like UCLA, Berkeley, and Santa Barbara, are significantly larger, while others, like mine, are on the smaller side. Most of the larger schools host their own version of what's commonly known as a tour day, where incoming students are invited to visit and explore the campus. But in reality, it's mostly just an excuse for current students to throw massive all-day parties. For example, Berkeley has Cal Day, and Santa Barbara hosts Deltopia. Even though my school is about 2.5 hours away from Santa Barbara, it's pretty common for students from smaller campuses to make the trip to the bigger ones just for that day. I've never really been one to party like that, so it was never something I did. But a few months ago, I realized it was my senior year, and I'd never get the chance to go again. So, when they asked me if I wanted to come with them to Santa Barbara's Deltopia, I decided to say screw it and just went. We drove down that Friday afternoon, the day before all the major festivities. The car was completely packed out. Hunter was driving, and the other friends joining us were Damon, Benjamin, and Armand. We're all above 6 feet tall, so the journey was painfully cramped. But it went by quickly with some good conversation and music. Once we got to Isla Vista, we spent the better part of an hour looking for parking with no luck. I'm not exaggerating about the parking situation. That's how popular Deltopia is. Just as we were about to give up, Hunter activated his charm and convinced a sorority girl to let us park in her designated spot. We all got a good chuckle out of that, so everything was going according to plan. Hunter's sister is a junior at UCSB, and she agreed to let us all crash on the floor of her apartment. That might sound a little ratchet to some, but during Deltopia, having a place to sleep is practically a golden ticket. Her and all of her roommates were super chill, so we decided to party with them that night, even though Deltopia technically didn't start until the next morning. There's one more thing I have to mention. Hunter is a really friendly guy, and because of that, a ton of people know him. He has this one friend named Amir, who is a little problematic. I'm using the word friends pretty generously here. Amir is one of those guys who clings to social circles without ever really being a part of them. He's insecure, loud, oblivious, constantly seeking validation, and somehow makes every conversation about himself. And before you call me out for gossiping, Amir has done a lot of messed up stuff to my friends, and I in the past, so I've earned the right. Amir had mentioned to Hunter a while back that he was also going to Deltopia. There was never any real conversation about where he'd be staying or who he was going with. He wasn't part of our plan, and none of us had brought him up on the drive down. About an hour after the crew settled into Hunter's sister's place, we decided to make an alcohol run for ourselves and her roommates. As the 5 of us were leaving the liquor store with our purchases, who do we see but Amir, just standing there on the curb with his hands in his pockets? No one said anything. We just kept walking towards the apartment, and he sort of fell in step with us, like he'd been there the entire time. The first thing out of Amir's mouth once we were a few blocks away from the store was, "Why are you guys so surprised to see me? Was this kid brain dead?" Of course we were surprised to see him. There was never any plan to meet up with Amir, let alone hang out with him. And as far as any of us knew, Hunter hadn't even told him where we were staying. We all kind of ignored him and just kept walking, unsure of how this was going to play out. Things immediately escalated once we got back to the apartment. Amir asked if he could use the bathroom at our apartment and then ran ahead of us when Hunter reluctantly agreed. When Hunter's sister answered the door, Amir walked right up to her and said, "I'm staying here," before stepping past her without waiting for a response. She obviously didn't know who Amir was, but just assumed he was part of our group. When Hunter realized Amir had lied to his sister, he was livid. I could go into extreme detail about what happened first, but here's all you need to know. Hunter told him straight up he had to leave, that he wasn't welcome there, and that lying to his sister was crossing a line. Amir didn't go quietly. He stood outside the door for another 20 minutes, trying to argue his way back in. Hunter's not the guy you want to mess around with, so Amir eventually took the hint and left. We got wasted after that, and admittedly, Amir was all any of us could talk about. We realized later that night that Hunter had been sharing his iPhone location with Amir, meaning Amir had stalked us to the apartment. But anyway, the next day was a blast. Deltopia certainly lived up to the hype. Most of the shenanigans were done by late afternoon, so we met up with 5 of our other friends, and the 10 of us found ourselves chilling back at Hunter's sister's apartment. We brought the rest of the group up to speed on the whole Amir situation, and they agreed. It was just as weird to them as it was to us. One of our friends, Rylan, said he might actually have Amir's location. He pulled out his phone to check, and I'm not kidding. His jaw literally dropped. He turned the screen toward us, and there it was. The little blue dot was practically right on top of where we were standing. But the moment we pointed it out, the dot suddenly started moving, fast. It was like Amir had been sitting nearby, maybe in a car, watching us. And the second we noticed, he took off. The whole thing was straight up bizarre. Him showing up a second time was borderline psychotic, especially after Hunter had explained to him why he wasn't welcome there. We probably should have taken the whole thing more seriously than we did. That behavior was extreme, even for Amir. Instead, we all just laughed about his weird obsessiveness and continued partying. That night, after we had all crashed, I woke up randomly, sometime well after midnight. I barely had time to process my surroundings when I heard glass shattering from somewhere deeper in the apartment. I shot up off the floor, looking around to see if anyone else was awake. No one was, probably because everyone had gone to sleep completely wasted. I realized pretty quickly that no one else had heard it. And if someone had broken in, I was the only one who could do anything about it. I didn't have a weapon or anything, so I just grabbed an empty wine bottle off the floor, took a deep breath, and started creeping toward the noise. My heart was pounding. When I entered the living room, I saw the sliding door that led to the balcony had been completely shattered. A huge rock sat in the middle of the floor, surrounded by glinting shards of glass. I didn't need convincing. I knew a mirror was behind it. I went to go wake my friends up when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a closet door handle jiggle a little. I froze, more scared than I had been just moments before. I didn't think Amir had the guts to go beyond destroying property, and the thought that he had broken into the apartment terrified me. I was just about to yank the closet door open when my better judgment forced me not to. Instead, I snuck back to the bedroom, woke Hunter up, and told him to back me up. The 2 of us walked towards the living room, but by the time we got there, the closet door was wide open. I looked around frantically, but I didn't see him. That's when Hunter reached into the closet and pulled out this massive kitchen knife. I stared in shock. Amir had literally been standing behind the door with a knife, probably intending to injure me. He could have literally ended my life had I opened that closet door. That was the most horrifying moment of my life. Hunter and I woke the rest of the house up, and we did a sweep to be 100% sure that Amir was nowhere in the apartment. We obviously got the police involved, but all that really came of that was just getting a police report. They told us property tends to get destroyed during Deltopia, and we were one of the many victims. Before you ask, Amir had stopped sharing his location with Rylan, so we couldn't even show the police that. We had to leave the next morning. Hunter was freaked out about leaving his sister and her roommates there, especially knowing that Amir had managed to sneak in there once already. Before we got in the car, he pulled out his phone and typed out this massive paragraph to Amir. I'm not going to air it out here, but you can guess what was said. The message never delivered, though. Amir had already blocked him. We all checked our phones and realized we'd been blocked too. Every single one of us. In the weeks that followed, none of us heard a word from Amir. It was like he had completely disappeared. Even now, I still can't fully process what's going on. For all the times Amir acts tough or aggressive, he's never actually shown any violent behavior. Honestly, I've always seen him as more passive than anything. But the fact that he knows where each of us lives still sits in the back of my mind. Even as I'm writing this, there's a part of me that's genuinely uneasy, like he might do something drastic. If anything changes, I'll post an update. But first, did you know that 98% of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed? That means you. And yes, I am speaking specifically to you. Probably aren't. So now would be a great time to leave a like on the video and subscribe. Anyhow, my name's Arthi. This happened quite a while back, but I'd say I still remember about 90% of it, like it just happened. It was late in the month, April 19th. The year was 1996. I had just finished basic training when I got my first assignment, working as a communications specialist at an air base in San Angelo, Texas. Getting stationed in Texas was actually perfect for me. I'm originally from Mississippi, and one of the main reasons I joined in the first place was to put as much distance between myself and home as I could. At the time, I was 24 years old. My closest friends on base were a guy named Seabass and a girl named Kay. I've since lost touch with them, but back then, the three of us were inseparable. It was a warm weekend, sometime in early April, when Seabass proposed taking a road trip to Austin for the day to experience a change of scenery. Kay and I were also getting sick of the base life monotony, so we agreed. Kay offered to drive, so we packed her SUV with our stuff and hit the road that same afternoon. About an hour into the drive, we were on a mostly empty stretch of highway when Seabass spoke up. He asked us if we had seen the car behind us pull up from the shoulder right after we had passed. I looked back and saw a dark-colored Tahoe or something similar trailing us at a steady distance. I hadn't seen it pull off the shoulder, but being as we were on the highway, it wasn't exactly the weirdest thing. But then Kay changed lanes just to see, and the SUV followed. She did it again a minute later, and again it mirrored her move. I was confused at first, but then a minute later the SUV put its lights on and everything made sense. We were getting pulled over by an undercover cop. Kay pulled over, and I watched as the cop pulled over behind us. I'm a pretty observant person. Processing information quickly is something I was quite literally trained to do, so I instantly realized something was off. The guy who stepped out didn't look like any cop I'd ever seen. He was wearing all black tactical gear, but nothing on him that said police. The only thing even remotely official looking about his uniform was a patch on his arm that said something I couldn't read. He didn't behave like a normal officer either. Instead of approaching Kay's window, he stood behind the car like he was waiting for something. I watched him a little while longer and realized he wasn't just standing behind the car, but was actively analyzing it. He was looking through the rear window like he was trying to see the stuff we packed. He was also checking out Kay's bumper stickers and her license plate. Seabass and Kay eventually caught on to the officer's strange behavior too, and Seabass rolled his window down before asking the officer if there was a problem instead of responding. The officer swiftly walked up to Kay's window and asked for her license and registration. Kay reluctantly gave it to him. He walked back to his vehicle and didn't return for a really long time. The three of us started whispering about how strange this whole encounter was getting, but we weren't sure what to do. After what felt like forever, the guy finally exited his car again. Only this time, 2 other men stepped out with him. I could feel my heartbeat ticking up, so I did some focused breathing to keep calm. The original officer walked back up to Kay's window and asked her if her father was in the army or something. Kay asked for clarification, and the officer mentioned the U.S. military bumper sticker on the back of her car. Kay left and said that she was the one in the military, then turned to Seabass and I and said them too. The moment Kay mentioned we were all in the military, I noticed a shift. The guy at her window didn't say anything right away, but his body language stiffened. He glanced back at the other 2 men, who were still standing near the rear of the SUV, and then he glanced back at Kay. There was a weird silence for a second, and then he just told Kay that he was letting her off with a warning and to drive more slowly. He handed back Kay's license and turned around without another word. The 3 of them got back in the car, and before Kay could even start her engine, the Tahoe pulled off and sped away. The 3 of us were dumbfounded. Seabass couldn't stop talking about how those guys weren't real officers. They would have done something shady had we all been civilians. There really wasn't much more we could do, so Kay just got back on the highway. Austin was actually a really good time, and by the time we got back to base, we had all but forgotten about the stop. It wasn't until about a week later that I was reminded of it. I was sitting in the rec room watching the local news with Seabass when a story came on that made me freeze up. Apparently, a man and woman had been found dead in a ditch along a stretch of highway just outside of San Angelo. According to the reporter, the victims had been robbed and murdered, and investigators believe they were dumped there the night before. What really got me, though, was the next part. The vehicle that was found abandoned near the scene turned out to be a black Tahoe. Police later confirmed it had been reported stolen several months earlier from a few states away. Seabass and I immediately went to track down Kay, and once we were all together, we agreed. There was no choice but to tell the police everything we had witnessed. We laid it all out for them, and as we did, I felt this wave of guilt wash over me for not speaking up sooner. Even now, I still find myself thinking about that one small detail, Kay's bumper sticker. It might have been the thing that kept us alive that day. And honestly, I can't shake the thought that if we hadn't been military, it could have just as easily been us lying in that ditch. I've always kept to myself. I'm a pretty private person by nature. That's one of the main reasons I've held off on sharing this story for so long. Honestly, the idea of it somehow being linked back to me is one of the worst things I can imagine. But recently, I started thinking, it would feel wrong to leave this world without at least putting it out there. So here it is. I just want to make it clear, sharing this is way outside my comfort zone. About a decade ago, I took a solo road trip from West Paterson, New Jersey, all the way down to Fort Worth, Texas. I was heading to visit my parents. Hadn't seen them in quite a while. I'd moved away from Fort Worth years earlier and hadn't really returned much since, so the trip felt long overdue. Somewhere along the way, maybe deep in Arkansas or just across the Oklahoma line, I honestly can't say for sure. My car started acting up. I tried to ignore it for a while, but eventually I had no choice but to pull over. There wasn't much around, just trees, open field, and a long, empty road behind me. I popped the hood and started poking around, pretending I knew what I was doing. I didn't. I was just sort of killing time, but I didn't want to admit that I was basically helpless. I figured I'd poke around for a bit, and once that failed, I'd call YREAA. I didn't actually have AAA, so I was really pissed, because I knew they charged me an arm and a leg. A few minutes later, though, I heard a car pulling up behind me. It was a nondescript white pickup truck. I remember noting to myself that it didn't have a front plate, or at least not one I could see. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. If I had to guess, I'd say he was in his mid-30s, maybe a little older, but worn down in a way that made him seem older than he probably was. He had curly hair and a long, uneven beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in years. He seemed like the kind of guy you could tell worked with his hands a lot, if that makes any sense. He honestly kind of looked like an older version of me. Same build, same height, same hair color, just a bit less well-groomed than I am. He walked over slowly, giving my car a once-over as he approached. He didn't ask if I needed help so much as assume it. Before I even said anything, he was already leaning over the engine like he knew what he was doing. I spoke up and told him what happened, then thanked him for stopping to help me. He told me he was a mechanic, and based on how quickly he got to work, I didn't question it. I was already thinking about how I could repay him for the help when he said something that kind of surprised me. After a minute or two of fiddling, he stepped back and gave the engine a look that didn't exactly inspire confidence. He muttered something about needing a compression tester. Apparently without it, the car wasn't going to start no matter what. Then he glanced over to his truck and said his friend, another mechanic, might be able to bring one over. I honestly had no idea what the part even was that he was talking about, but he seemed genuine, so I believed him. I thanked him again and he pulled out his phone, presumably to call his buddy. He froze up for a few seconds while looking at his phone screen and then put his phone back in his pocket, saying it was dead. He then asked if he could borrow mine to make the call. I didn't even think twice about it. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and handed it to him without a second thought. He took it with one hand, and then, almost in the same motion, he reached into his jacket with the other and pulled out a gun. I instantly knew what was about to happen. He didn't say much, just told me to sit down on the shoulder and not try anything stupid. His voice didn't shake. He'd clearly done something like this before, or at least thought about it enough for it to seem practiced. I did what he said. The whole thing felt strangely calm, like we were both just going through something totally normal. He rifled through my pockets and took my wallet, my backpack from the passenger seat, and even had me show him the password to my phone. Then he drove off, and that was that. I had literally just been robbed on the side of the road. I know I'm speaking about it calmly now, but you best believe I was livid at the time. I don't think even now I've ever been more angry in my life. Unfortunately, there's more to this story, much more. I'm not going to get into too much detail, but someone eventually did stop and help me. After getting my car started, they were even nice enough to give me directions all the way to my parents' house so I could do it without my phone. I made it to Fort Worth later that night, and given the circumstances, my visit with my parents was actually really nice. The next few weeks were a blur of canceling cards, replacing IDs, updating passwords, and basically recovering everything I'd lost. It was annoying and time-consuming, but I eventually squared away as much as I possibly could, and I got on with my life. Fast forward like 6 months. That's when things started to hit the fan. One day, I got a letter in the mail from some bank I didn't recognize. It was addressed to me, thanking me for opening a new line of credit. I figured it was a scam at first, or just some kind of junk mail, but then another one came, this time from Best Buy, with a card I'd supposedly opened and already racked up over $1,000 on. The charges were all from a random town in Tennessee. At first, I was more confused than anything, but that's when it hit me. I had forgotten until that exact moment that my Social Security card was likely in my wallet when I had gotten robbed. And now the guy who had robbed me had everything he needed to become me. The next month of my life was a living hell. My credit report was a mess. Hard inquiries, new cards, balances I didn't spend. It felt like every day there was something new. If any of you have dealt with identity thefts, you know how hopeless it can seem. I filed a report with the FTC, placed a fraud alert on all 3 credit bureaus, and even froze my credit. I went to the police and gave them everything I had, but without a name or a license plate, they apparently couldn't do a thing. I filed a formal report anyway, just to have a paper trail. I even called the local police departments in each of the towns where fraud had occurred. I followed every step you're supposed to follow, but somehow it wasn't enough. Things kept escalating. Whoever was stealing my identity was being extremely cautious about it. A few weeks later, I got a call from my health insurance provider. Someone had received emergency care under my name at a hospital in Georgia. It wasn't just a billing issue. There were now records in my file that didn't belong to me. Stuff that could actually screw me over if I ever landed in the hospital and couldn't speak for myself. I obviously reported everything to the police again, but that was the last straw for me. I decided to take matters into my own hands. From then on, I transformed my whole lifestyle and spent every ounce of my free time trying to track down the perpetrator myself. I set up Google alerts for my name and any recent cities tied to the fraud. I checked my credit report constantly. I scanned forums and dug through social media. I did everything I could think of. One night, on a whim, I decided to start checking Craigslist. I focused on cities tied to the fraud, places where charges had shown up from, or mail had come from. After looking around for a while, something caught my eye. It was a posting from Jackson, Tennessee. The listing was for a bunch of used power tools and some other miscellaneous items. I wasn't sure why it stood out to me so much, but the longer I looked, the more familiar it seemed. And then it clicked. Everything listed matched up perfectly with some of the things that had been charged to that Best Buy card. I sat there for a while, unsure what to do. Eventually, I responded to the listing, saying I was interested in a couple of the items and asked if they were still available. I debated trying to attach a tracker link or something clever, but I didn't want to spook whoever it was. If it was him and he got even a hint that someone was on to him, he'd vanish. So I kept it simple. To my surprise, it didn't seem like the guy was on to me at all. After exchanging some emails over the next few days, he gave me a time and a public place to meet, and he told me to bring cash. The meeting was supposed to be the next day. I debated driving all the way to Tennessee myself, but I couldn't bring myself to. There's no telling what I would have done to that guy had I seen him in person a second time. So instead, I called the police department in Jackson to see if they remembered my case. They did, and I basically pleaded with them to help me out. I gave them everything I had and damn near prayed. By some miracle, they told me the details lined up just well enough for it to be worthwhile. They said they'd at least talk to him and see if there was any information they could get out of him. The next day, after a little back and forth, I got the guy to tell me he was driving a red pickup truck. I communicated that with the police and waited. After legitimately several hours, they called me. When they told me what had happened, I wanted to drop on my knees. I swear on my life. The officer told me that as soon as the guy spotted the patrol cars near the meetup spot, he immediately sped out of the lot. He didn't even try to play it cool. That alone was enough to raise red flags, so they followed him. Not long after, the guy ended up losing control of his truck and crashing into a ditch. It wasn't a major accident, but it was enough to get officers legally involved beyond just a casual questioning. According to them, he was a total wreck, visibly shaken, panicking, talking in circles. You get it. As soon as they even mentioned the Best Buy items, he folded. He admitted he didn't know where the stuff had come from, that it wasn't his, and that a friend had given it to him, and he had independently decided to resell it. It could not have been more perfect. The guy ratted out his friends, and with his cooperation, the police were able to acquire enough evidence to arrest the real perp. I've never felt more relief in my life. Like I said earlier, I'm not trying to have this traced back to me, so I'm going to keep things vague from here on out. I will say this much, though. The guy who robbed me wasn't by himself. As it turns out, there were 3 of them. The wildest part? I wasn't the only one they targeted. From what I gathered, they had been going after travelers and lone drivers across several interstate routes, mainly down south. In the end, all 3 were caught. They were charged and locked up. I won't go into more details, but what I will say is, justice was definitely served. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing video. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. All right, that's it for today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Driving alone at 3 a.m. was routine, until a stop at a closed gas station ended with 3 strangers hiding just feet away inside his truck. I've been a trucker for close to 15 years now. This happened to me in 2017. I was driving an overnight haul through the Mojave Desert in California, headed for a destination in Arizona. I think I was delivering appliances. I don't really remember. It was pitch black darkness in every direction. The headlights on my semi were really dim at the time, and I had been putting off getting them fixed forever. Usually I couldn't tell the difference, but since there were basically no other cars on the road, it was much more obvious. I remember having to strain my eyes every few minutes to make out the road in the distance. That could have been a horror story in of itself. I was debating pulling over for a couple hours and waiting for sunrise, but I didn't want to waste my time. I desperately needed the money at the time, so I kept driving, even though it wasn't fully safe. I figured since it was basically a straight line, it would be okay. I think it was about an hour before sunrise when I saw something approaching fast in the distance. Worried about hitting an animal, I slammed on the brakes. As my truck screeched to a stop, I realized what was in front of me: a car with its hazards on. The weird thing was that it was in the exact middle of the road, like literally on the double yellow. What was even weirder was that the passenger door was wide open. My truck stopped maybe a foot before hitting it. Not to toot my own horn, but I'm a pretty fearless guy, and I know my way around a bar fight. Because of this, I wasn't really scared when I saw the car. I was more curious than anything. I thought maybe someone needed a jump or something, so I reversed the semi and pulled over. I thought about throwing some flares down, but decided against it since I hadn't seen a single other car on the road besides this one. I got out of my truck and made my way over to the car. It was a warm, still night. I remember thinking how strange it was that there was almost no wind. It was also really quiet that night. The faint click of the hazards was the only sound in what felt like the entire desert. I got a little closer to the car. I vividly remember that it was a new-looking red Ford Fusion. I approached the car a little cautiously. Like I said, the passenger door was wide open. I walked around the car and stopped in my tracks. It was completely empty. I made sure of it too, checking the back seat and anywhere someone might be laying down. There was literally no one inside. All of a sudden, I was much less sure about the situation. I was expecting someone to need help of some sort, maybe even someone who took a nap in a really dumb spot. I certainly wasn't expecting this, though. The car was literally empty. I cast a few glances over my shoulder, feeling a lot more uneasy now. I kept whipping my head around, looking in every direction. I felt like someone was going to charge me or something. The problem was, it was so dark that I couldn't see that far in front of me, except for what was lit up by my truck's headlights. It was eerie. I waited a while longer, thinking about getting back in my truck and forgetting about this whole thing. Someone was out there, somewhere. Against my better judgment, I decided to keep investigating. I looked inside the car, but everything seemed completely normal. The key was even in the ignition, although the engine was turned off. I got back out of the car and made my way over to the trunk. Might as well have a look, I figured. I went to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. I grabbed the key out of the ignition and unlocked the trunk. Still, though, the thing wouldn't budge. It was jammed from the inside somehow. I opened the back door and tried getting at the trunk through the back seat. To my surprise, it actually opened. There were 3 squished garbage bags back there, along with a rope that was tying the trunk closed. I remember glancing one more time over my shoulder before reaching for them. The coast was clear. I must have been within 5 inches from one of the bags when the loudest gunshot I've ever heard rang out into the night. I slammed my head on the roof of the car in shock. I didn't even think. I threw the keys on the front seat and got out of the car as fast as I could. As I was climbing into my semi, I heard a grungy voice yelling in the distance. He yelled "hey" a bunch of times, and his voice seemed to be quickly approaching. I scrambled into the semi and turned it on. I threw it in gear as fast as I could. I remember cursing a bunch of times as the engine initially stalled, and that's when I saw it. As my truck began pulling out, I saw a person standing at the trunk of the car. It was a short, husky guy with red hair. He was wearing overalls and shin-high boots. In his left hand, he was holding a small shovel. In his right, though, was an old-looking hunting rifle. We locked eyes for a few seconds as my truck began to drive past him. He didn't move. I remember him not looking crazy or anything. He had this worried look on his face. As I passed him, he dropped his shovel and started waving his hands. He yelled "wait" a few times, but I wasn't staying there another second. As I drove away, I watched in the rear view mirror as he ran after my truck for a few seconds before sprinting back to his car. It was clear he wanted me to stop, but there was absolutely no way I was going to do that. I stepped on it, pushing the semi much faster than I should have. I drove for like 5 minutes and started to think I was in the clear, but then I saw headlights fast approaching behind me. I remember feeling more scared than I've ever felt in my entire life. I called the police and told them what happened to the best of my ability. That's when the car was basically right on my tail. It started honking like crazy at me. I honestly didn't know what to do, so I just kept driving, praying to God he wouldn't try and ram me. After like 15 minutes of this, he cut in front of me and hit his brakes, forcing me to slow down. I was just about to crash into him when finally some flashing police lights appeared ahead. The Ford veered off to the right and sped into the desert, disappearing from sight. I pulled over and waited for the officer to show up. I frantically told him what had happened, but the useless cop decided to get a report from me rather than chase the guy down. I was so pissed about that. I told the guy, like twice, that he could probably catch up to him if he left now. The cop told me not to worry, and that they'd do a thorough search as soon as backup arrived. He sent me on my way and said they'd call me if they ever had an update for me. They never did. None of my buddies have a story this crazy. And I've told him more times than I can count. I know what you're probably thinking. That guy was definitely burying bodies. That doesn't really explain why he had such a small shovel or why he tried to follow me. The bags in his trunk were also too small for that, although some of my buddies think he might have done some dismembering. For my own sanity, I like to think that he was burying some other kind of animal, maybe putting a diseased dog out of its misery, or some dangerous snakes. I really have no idea. Either way, I've never been totally comfortable driving through deserts late at night after this experience. But first, did you know that 98% of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed? That means you. And yes, I am speaking specifically to you. Probably aren't. So now would be a great time to leave a like on the video and subscribe. Anyhow, I'm sure you've seen some of the more modern videos online where truckers will document their daily routines and provide tips for each other. Or maybe you haven't. But being as I'm on the younger side in this industry, every time I open TikTok or YouTube Shorts, that's all I see. I won't get into it, but I had to drop out of a pretty prestigious university for some personal reasons. And people always tell me I could have been more than a trucker. It's honestly not a bad gig, though. I've been making deliveries for north of 2 years. Obviously, the only strenuous part of the job is the long hours. You can never truly gauge how the isolation will affect you without experiencing it firsthand. My only advice would be to make peace with whatever demons might be lurking in your subconscious, because they'll definitely eat at your brain in the lonely hours. That's what happened to me anyway. This happened to me 3 months after getting employed by my first company. I was basically as new in this trade as one could get. I was driving from southern New Jersey to Lafayette, Indiana, a 12-hour drive. 12 hours driving might not seem that crazy, but factor in the fact that I just completed an 8-hour trip, and that should put things into perspective. I wanted to get deliveries done as quickly as possible, so I opted to drive through the night. I'd get to Lafayette just before 3 a.m. Things were going smoothly. There were virtually no other cars on the road, so I was able to push the semi a little faster than normal. About halfway through the drive, I remember reaching down at the center console to chug a Red Bull, but there weren't any. Of course, I had forgotten to restock my truck after completing my previous delivery. After slapping my dashboard a few times, I groaned in frustration, knowing I'd have to stop somewhere. There was nothing I hated more than having to make stops during my drives. I might be unique in this, but I always get exponentially more tired when my vehicle is immobile, even if I'm only stopped for like 20 seconds. After glancing up at the navigation, I figured I had no choice. Either fall asleep on the road or stop and get an energy drink. In my brain, those options were pretty much equivalent. Reluctantly, I pulled into the first service stop I saw. I had literally no clue where I was, probably somewhere in Ohio at this point. Too late. I realized this wasn't actually a service stop. It was what looked like an abandoned gas station and a repurposed convenience store. I'm not sure if there's any better way to describe it. Either way, it looked like there was another quick stop store not far up the road, so I figured I'd go there. If anything, I parked the semi and made my way over to the first convenience store. To be completely honest, I was expecting one of two things to happen. Either the place would be open, or the door would be locked. You can imagine my surprise. Surprise, then, when the door swung open into a pitch-black store, I looked around, hoping maybe I'd get lucky, and there would be a drink or snack left behind. Just before I was about to turn around, my eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I picked up on a faint glow emanating from the corner of the room. I made my way over to it, and the glow turned out to be coming from a back room of some sort. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the door slowly to my pleasant surprise. There was a plugged-in refrigerator against the wall. Eagerly, I opened the door, but found nothing. Literally nothing. The shelves had literally been removed, like the whole appliance had been gutted. As I was shutting the door, I was 90% certain I heard a clatter from the main room, like something hitting the floor. I froze for a good 10 seconds. Had I imagined it? There was no way. Quietly, I walked back into the main room and looked around. Nothing. Part of me wanted to keep investigating. I didn't have time for this, though. I walked out the entrance door and basically jogged to the other shop. It was open. Thank God I paid for my drink and made it back to my truck. Something about this whole stop felt wrong. I needed to get back on the road as soon as possible. I took one last glance at the abandoned store and noticed the door was now open. I was 100% positive I had shut it behind me. It wasn't my job to figure out what was going on here, though. So I started the engine and merged my semi back onto the highway. The caffeine started kicking in and snapped me out of my tired haze pretty quickly. My mind began to wander, and I started thinking about how bizarre that whole thing had actually been. I guess a squat or an abandoned building wasn't the strangest thing in the world, but my brain couldn't explain that refrigerator, no matter what theory I thought of. I tried to forget about it and kept driving. It was then that I started noticing weird movements in the curtain behind me. Sweat started dripping down my forehead. I watched in the rear view mirror as the curtain seemed to billow and move. Even though I didn't have the air on, I thought the worst. There was someone in my truck. I didn't have any weapons on me or anything, so I discreetly punched in the nearest police station on my phone. The drive there was the most tense and horrifying 20 minutes of my life. I kept imagining that person reaching out to grab me or trying to crash my truck. Finally, I approached the police station. I stopped the semi as close as I possibly could get and basically ran over to the police station. In seconds, my truck was surrounded by police, and after I opened the back, what I saw will stay with me for life. The police pulled out 3 homeless-looking people, 2 men and 1 woman. They were wearing rags and were wrapped in nasty-looking blankets. One of the men was armed with 2 switchblades. All 3 of them refused to talk, but stared menacingly at me as they were getting cuffed. I have no idea what they wanted. I don't think I'll ever know. My name is Kevin. I've been a trucker for varying companies for the better part of 15 years now. Things have become pretty routine at this point. Pick up the goods and materials, verify them for accuracy, and deliver them as instructed. We're not paid by the hour, so efficiency is the most important thing in this line of work. For someone like me, who's been doing this forever, I like to think I can outwork all these young guns that are snapping these jobs up. This isn't always great, though. Usually I push myself to the absolute limit when it comes to functioning on barely any sleep. 4 years ago, I was working for a warehouse based in North Dakota. For anyone who doesn't know, North Dakota is one of the flattest states, which makes trucking a little easier. This also meant that skipping out on a few hours of sleep could mean the difference between employment and getting the sack. It was a chilly Tuesday morning in May. The beginning of the week meant that more loads needed to be shipped, which meant more work for me. I wanted to knock it all out in one shot, so I traced my route into Montana accordingly, planning on not stopping even once to sleep. I hit the road a few hours after lunch, expecting to reach my destination very early the next morning. I pushed the semi as much as possible, doing maybe a couple over the speed limit. It was getting late, and I remember rubbing the crust from my eyelids as the clock ticked past midnight. I was having trouble keeping my eyes open, but I only had about an hour left in this drive, so I gritted my teeth and kept going. My buddy Tristan, who was also a trucker, introduced me to smelling salts when I first started out. If you don't know, smelling salts are basically some kind of crystals in a little bottle. One sniff and you're wide awake. You had to be careful though. Too many back-to-back uses could be dangerous, or at least that's what Tristan told me. They burn your nose a little bit, but whenever I needed a boost, I'd reach for the smelling salts first. This was one of those times. I took a big whiff and shot my head back, my reflexes taking over. I felt the adrenaline course through my body and I hoped the feeling would last the rest of the drive. 1/2 hour shot by, and I was really struggling. I felt myself start to doze off, and the blare of my truck drifting into the shoulder jolted me awake. This was getting dangerous. I thought I had to pull off. I was all alone on the highway, but there was nowhere to pull off. There was just woods on either side of me. I slowed the truck down, searching desperately for somewhere to pull over. At this low speed, my headlights pierced through the darkness, and I was able to see a lot more. As I looked around, I saw something that confused me. There was a purple dress lying in the middle of the road. What the hell? I thought, rubbing my eyes. Was I hallucinating? I blinked like 6 times just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. It was real. I approached the dress with my truck and stared at it as I rolled by. In hindsight, this should have been more of a red flag, but I think I was just too exhausted to process what was going on. About 200 or so yards away, I passed a pair of shoes. Now I was starting to freak out. What the hell was going on? I passed the shoes, praying to God there would be a place to pull off soon. My old man, David, was a super religious guy, so I clutched his old cross and hoped he would come through for me. A little further up the road, I saw a bunch more random clothing, some of which looked like little kids' clothing. This time, I stopped the truck. The panic started to set in. Something was very, very wrong. I sat in the driver's seat with the truck at a standstill. I was expecting something to happen, but it never did. So I did what my instincts told me to do. I stepped out of the truck and went to inspect the clothing. I still remember the feeling of the chilly morning air piercing my skin, which definitely helped my exhaustion. I approached the pile as cautiously as I could. It was indeed kids' clothing. It looked like there were both boy and girl pieces of clothing in the pile. I looked around into the woods, but I couldn't see much of anything in the darkness. I had my head on a swivel, worried that this was some kind of trap. I decided it was not my business to figure out what was going on, so I made my way back to my truck. Just then, I heard a crunch from the left. I whipped around, trying to see what was there. I stood there, waiting to hear another sound. After about 30 seconds, there was another crunch, but this time from the opposite side of the road. My survival instincts kicked in, and I sprinted towards the truck. I jumped into the front seat, but just before I slammed the door, I heard a child's scream ring out. I froze, my heart bursting out of my chest. I was caught in a crossroads. I wasn't going to fight some random people in the pitch-black woods, but I couldn't just abandon some helpless kids either. Before I could make a decision, another almost identical child's scream rang out. Without thinking, I turned the truck on and pointed its nose toward the spot in the woods where I heard the noise. My headlights lit up about 30 yards into the woods. There were 3 or 4 people, one of whom was holding a massive speaker. They ducked behind a couple trees as my truck lit them up, but I had exposed them for just enough time to make out what they were doing. They hid from the light before I could really make out any distinctive features. But I swear, on my old man David's grave, they were holding up a speaker, trying to lure me into the woods with a fake kid screaming. I was just in shock. I just sat there, staring at the trees those people had just hid behind. I reached for my phone to call the police, but before I finished dialing, I heard a thump from the body of the truck. Someone had thrown something from the other direction. I was done. I turned back to face the road and slammed on the gas as I speed off. I could make out a person on the other side of the road. He shouted something I couldn't understand before launching something at the truck that cracked the glass of my passenger side window. I drove the final hour in silence. I was too scared to process what had just happened, but there was no way in hell I was stopping to sleep in those woods. I completed my delivery and then knocked out. I must have slept for 10 hours straight. When I woke up, the first thing I did was call the police, who told me they'd investigate those woods and give me any updates. I then thought about the whole thing and how stupid I was to get out of my truck. I should have just minded my own business, but the thought of some kids being kidnapped or worse was just too much for me to ignore. To this day, I still have no idea what those people were trying to do. I don't know why they didn't just rush me when they had the chance, or what they were planning to do to me if I ran out in the woods after the kids screaming. In all my years of being a trucker, nothing has ever come close to being as strange or downright terrifying as this experience. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing video. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. All right, that's it for today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. At 4 a.m., under the pale glow of the streetlights, I saw her, desperate, pounding on the back window of a speeding car. At first, I thought it was a trick of the shadows, until the driver, with a sinister grin, shoved her down, and the car swerved violently. A cold dread washed over me. This wasn't just a nightmare. It was a real-life horror unfolding before my eyes. And then, a chilling thought gripped me. What if I was the only one who could confront this darkness and save her? It was about 4 in the morning one Saturday, and I was driving to work down the interstate. I was in the middle lane, moving pretty quickly, because I was already running a bit late to work that morning. So when I noticed a car in my left mirror catching me pretty quickly, I was almost alarmed. I had to already be going like 75 to 80, so he had to be going anywhere from 90 to 100. The car quickly caught up to me. It was a gray Honda Accord Coupe. I took a look into the car, curious to see who was behind the wheel. Even though it was still dark out, I could see the driver looking back at me as he passed. Then I noticed someone in the back seat too. It was a young woman who appeared to be banging on the back window. Initially, I didn't understand. I assumed it was a girl messing with me or whatever. It's usually not a person's first instinct to assume something sinister is going on. But when I saw the driver apparently push her down under the window and the car swerve at the same time, then I knew something was wrong. That woman was trying to get someone's attention and call for help. I started to speed up a little bit and got behind them so I could keep up. I could see the driver continuously reach into the back of the car with a swinging motion. He looked to be hitting her. I could see her arms flailing in the back of the car. I was in complete shock. I was actually witnessing a kidnapping right in front of me. As I was behind them, matching their speed of about 95 miles per hour, I took out my phone and called 911. As I was on the phone, the car in front of me's brake lights lit up, and he started to slow down to a gradual stop. He definitely noticed that I saw what was going on and thought that I was following him. As much as I wanted to save that woman's life, I didn't know if the driver was armed with a gun or not, so I pulled around him and floored it. I wanted to keep behind them though, so I pulled off the next exit, but didn't go entirely up the exit ramp. I waited for the car to pass by down the highway. Then I drove over the grass and back onto the highway and began to floor it to catch up to the car, all while still talking to 911, telling them where we were, what kind of car they were in, and how fast we were going. I was easily going 90 again to catch up to them. As I caught up to the car again, going in insane speed, he noticed me again, even before I got too close. He started to brake in front of me again. I tried to go around him, but he cut me off. I had to stop. He got out from his car and started running towards my car with something in his hand, and in a panic, I threw the car in reverse until he stopped chasing me. Then I put it back in drive before he could get back in his car, and I drove quickly past him. The 911 operator told me there was a state trooper not far ahead from our location, and to just keep driving until I passed him. The man in the car behind me continued to follow me, both of us still going at an insane 90 miles per hour plus. I felt the weight of 1 million pounds released off my shoulders when the flashing blue and red lights appeared in my rearview mirror behind the car, chasing me. With me in front of him and the cop behind him, he didn't have much maneuverability, and he quickly pulled over onto the grass. I pulled over in front of him, but with at least 2 cars worth of space between us, because I still didn't know how this was about to go down. Luckily, the cop, with his gun drawn, got the guy out of the car with his hands up. By then, I got out and watched the whole thing. He was on the ground in cuffs now, laying on his stomach. Another police car showed up, and another cop entered the scene. The woman in the back of the car was let out. She was badly beaten, in tears, and extremely ecstatic to be saved, as she kept praising me for saving her life. The driver of the car was her ex-boyfriend, who had come to her house, and when she refused to talk to him, he attacked her, grabbed her, and threw her in the back of his car, which had the child locks on. It's scary to think where he might have been taking her, or what he was planning to do to her if I or anybody else didn't witness her screaming for help in the back of the car. I made a trip to visit Boston to support a family member who was running in the Boston Marathon. I was driving from Chicago to Massachusetts and had to take Route 20, possibly the longest highway in the United States. I don't much like flying, so I decided to start driving around 3 p.m. after work. My GPS was telling me it would be a 15-hour drive, so knowing how I drove, it would probably be 14 hours. My ETA was telling me 6 a.m. I was expecting 5 a.m. if I didn't stop. I'm the type who doesn't like to make many stops on long car rides. I like to just bang out the whole ride in one go. Most of Route 20 is open land, and there isn't a whole lot of traffic in a lot of it. I'd say 10 hours and around 1 a.m. Thus, I was basically one of the only cars on the highway. I had music blasting to keep me awake. I was comparatively almost done. Not really, but I was optimistic. I was starting to get slightly tired, though, even after the 2 cups of coffee I drank. I didn't want to pull off for more coffee, though, so I tanked through it. It would make finally collapsing into a bed when I'd get there all the more rewarding. One moment, I was the only car in sight. Then next thing I knew, there were headlights in my rearview mirror. I was in the left lane, and he was kind of on my ass, so I switched to the right lane. He sped up a bit, passed by me, then for some reason slowed to match my speed, just as my front bumper aligned with his rear bumper. Then he just matched my speed for the longest time. I started to speed up to pass him. As soon as I got in front of him, he turned into my lane behind me, so close it almost looked like he was going to clip my car. I had no choice but to speed up even more to get him off my ass. I wasn't looking to be the victim of a road rage incident, not at this hour especially. As I speed up, so did he. I switched into the left lane, and so did he. Now I knew something was wrong. Couldn't be an unmarked cop. It was some old ratty pickup truck. The truck started to flash its lights behind me. I didn't slow down. I was honestly afraid because I had never experienced anything on the road like this. I kept driving, stepping on the gas just a bit to increase my speed, 5 to 10 miles per hour, hoping to pass a cop or any other cars for that matter. But I couldn't see another set of taillights as far as the eye could see. Just the very seldom car zooming past on the other side of the highway. The pickup truck behind me then switched lanes and floored it. I heard the aggressive roar of his truck's engine passing me. He cut in front of me, then he started to brake. I tried to swerve around him, but he kept blocking me. I was forced to stomp on the brakes too. I started to honk because it's all I could do. As we slowed, the man in front of me put on his hazards and started waving his arm out the window, signaling for me to pull to the side of the road. I obviously didn't listen. I took the chance to quickly pull around him as he started pulling onto the grass, and then I floored it. My sedan could easily escape his pickup truck, but I hit 100, and he was still not far behind me. I got off the highway at the first exit. I stopped at the red light at the end of the exit ramp, not expecting him to still be behind me, but they were. The pickup truck's headlights pulled up behind me. Then the truck pulled up to the red light next to me. I looked to my left at the truck, and the window rolled down. Inside were 3 people. I'd assumed men, wearing vendetta masks. They all looked at me, trying to scare me, I'm sure, but it worked. I blew the red light onto the main road, and finally there were at least other cars around. The pickup truck finally stopped following me. At a certain point, I was scared I was going to be killed. It was more than just a road rage incident. I didn't get the plate number. In fact, I don't even remember seeing a plate on that truck. All I know is it was some 90s black pickup truck. After that, I parked in a Walmart parking lot and fell asleep. I woke up around 8 and finished the drive. I told my family about the incident, and I warn everybody to be careful when driving late at night. It was a Tuesday night in March. I was driving back from a friend's house in the city, a trek that would take me about an hour in decent weather, but a deep fog had set in on the long, lonely highway. After midnight, this particular stretch of road was often abandoned, save for the odd semi, their plates showing unfamiliar lettering and colors from places I'd never been to. It was 1 a.m. It had been a long day, wandering around for hours with my friends, shopping, checking out new cafes. It had left me tired. My eyelids were heavy, and the impenetrable fog made the highway an unending, drifting mass of hypnotizing gray. I drove cautiously, at times slowing my speed to a steady crawl and flashing my hazard lights to let anyone behind me know I was there. Suddenly a vehicle appeared, its wheels half on the highway and half on the shoulder. I slammed on my brakes and pulled over behind it, narrowly passing by the bumper. My heart was beating heavily after the near miss, so I put my car into park to catch my breath behind the black sedan. I watched as the car began slowly rolling forward off the road, so it was fully parked on the shoulder. The car sat for a moment, then the driver's side window rolled down. An arm appeared and did a waving motion to pull over. At this point, the adrenaline from the sudden stop was still pumping through my body, and it made sense to move further off the road. I followed the car as it took a slight turn onto a side road. It came to a stop, and the driver's side door opened. The driver walked towards me through the fog. A tall, lean guy wearing a black winter jacket and jeans. He looked younger, 30-ish, and he was smiling as he approached my car, illuminated by my headlights. I rolled down my window a crack, thinking maybe he was coming up to apologize for his unsafe parking. He got to my window and then motioned for me to roll it down further. I shook my head no, feeling uneasy, and told him I would be able to hear him. He asked where I was heading, and I said home. He said the fog wasn't supposed to let up anytime soon, and that it wasn't safe to drive in. I let him know I was okay with it. He raised his eyebrows and asked why I pulled over then. I didn't want to start anything with this man, so I lied and said I had gotten a phone call and needed to pull over to answer it. He smirked, and it felt like he could tell I was lying. He said he lived with his wife and son just down the road, about 5 minutes, if I wanted to wait it out. I shook my head again, but he wasn't taking no for an answer. He tried to scare me, saying how it's 10 times more likely for me to die in a car crash when it's foggy, and that I looked tired and I should really think of my family before getting back on the road. I held my ground. He was getting angry. He began looking back at his car, and I saw someone move in the passenger seat I hadn't seen before. Suddenly, the man was grabbing at my door handle, trying to open it. Thankfully, it was locked. The passenger door to the car opened, and another man came running towards me with a baseball bat. I put my car in reverse, and the driver yelled something at him as I hit the gas. He took a swing at my car, but missed. Luckily, I hadn't pulled too far off the highway, but it was hard to tell where this road ended and the highway began as I backed up in the heavy fog. I turned my wheels and put my car into drive, praying there was no traffic coming up behind me. I floored it as I haphazardly merged onto the highway, not looking back. I often wonder when I'm driving that stretch of road if they tried to stop anyone else that night and what would have happened to me. Had I rolled my window down further, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing video. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. All right, that's it for today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.